All right. All right. Welcome, everybody. We are live, and I am with my good friend, my Father Vladimir. Father Vladimir joins me tonight. Hopefully, everybody can hear me. Can you hear me? Is the sound good? We want to make sure our sound is good before we start going.
Yes, yes, I can hear you, and I'm
Good.
very happy to see you and all of you who are watching us. God bless you.
And if you guys would in the chat, let me know that the sound is good before we start doing this and talking for a long time. And I realize that there's some issue. All right. Yes. So tonight we wanted to kind of kick off our new series that we're doing, and I have to thank Father Vladimir for setting this up because he reached out to his friend who is Andrei Tarkovsky, the Jr., who is the, I guess you could say, the handling the estate, I guess, the films and making films on his own right. He had just recently done in 2019 a documentary that we interviewed Andrei about that we're going to use to kick off the series, which that interview will be up in the next couple weeks. But we wanted to kind of give everybody a teaser because even though
Well,
that's a
Jay, I'm sorry
yep.
to interrupt. I'm getting like a double, triple feedback for some reason.
Okay, well I'll just mute when I'm not when I pause. So is that better
Because
when I
I'm
mute?
no, I'm hearing like the what you just said several times over. It keeps going and going.
Are you listening to the interview? You have to turn that off if you've got YouTube or something on.
Mm.
Did you mute yourself? I can't hear you.
No, no, I didn't mute.
So you shouldn't be hearing an echo because it's just me and you talking.
No, it's not an echo. It's like a repetition. Okay. Hold on.
I'm just making sure you
Yep.
don't have the video playing in the
Yes, yes,
background.
yes, yes. I had my YouTube window
Yeah,
open.
so
I
you'll have
think I
to turn that off.
apologize.
It's okay.
Yes. To come back to the meeting. One sec. Okay.
All right, so as we said, we were covering. We got into the first of the series. We did a long interview with Andrei on the documentary that he did on his father called A Cinema Prayer 2019. And we both took a lot of notes that we didn't totally get to. So tonight, what we want to do is talk about the rest of that documentary that we took notes on and cover all of our notes and prepare everybody for what's coming next, which is a series where we interview Andrey Jr. on all of the films one by one. So, how did you meet him? If you don't mind us hearing this story, Father Vladimir.
No, I gladly will share it, and I wanted to share it when we had our interview, but it was so packed with so much amazing stuff that I didn't even want to talk about myself as much. But actually, the way we met with Andre was, in my experience, was very providential and powerful. The first time I met him was in Florence, in the church of the Nativity of Christ and the Saint Nicholas. The lower part of the church is dedicated to Saint Nicholas. I was baptized in that church in Florence. It's an Orthodox Russian Orthodox church with very rich history, and Andrei is a parishioner of that parish. And Father Georgi Latinsky, who has been a rector of that church for almost 30 years now, has conducted a funeral commemoration service for his father's uh, death anniversary, and he came there. Was during the week, and I was helping Father Georgi to serve at the time in Florence, and we had what they call panichidas, as a litany service for the departed. And Andrei's also, which stuck with me very interestingly, Andrei's fiance Natasha, she's Italian, and she's a violinist, and she afterwards she played Bach's Ciaccone. That was Andrei Tarkovsky's favorite musical piece. That was just very touching and very beautiful. There wasn't a lot of people. It was almost private service, and afterwards we met, and basically we kind of met with, I feel, with blessing of God for sure, and with the blessing of his father. And of course I didn't anticipate that this will be taken to where we have taken it at this point, but I always felt the seeds of this beginning have been planted. And then since we've seen each other many times, and have continued our friendship in a distance here. But just recently, about a month ago, I visited Florence, and we had a wonderful meeting and a very cool interview as well that we will probably introduce later on. We're getting it edited and put together as well, so it'll probably be part of our show sequence anthology as well, because there I focus a little bit more on topics of Florence and the location and other things. But that's basically how we met, and so there it is.
And I'm going to put a link below to the documentary that people can watch, and also the interview that I did with Father Vladimir about a year ago, where we went really deep into Renaissance, neoclassical, etc., in regard to the city of St. Petersburg. Father Vladimir gave us a big breakdown of the symbolic in that talk. Everybody really liked that. And you spoke at my event in Orlando, and everybody really loved the geometric analysis that you did of some of those Renaissance works. But so
Thank you. Yes, yes, it was a very, very enjoyable experience, and we're still kind of reaping fruits of it, because a lot of people who came there, they came to visit our parish here that I serve
oh,
at.
good.
That's St. Nicholas Parish in Palm Coast, Florida, not too far from St. Augustine. That's more known location, about half an hour away. And people have started to come and join Orthodoxy. In fact, we had three converts that came after that meeting, basically, and it has been a very fruitful event. I also had I wanted to mention, and I know you're very generous about sharing this. Part of my reason for going to Florence, and actually where that interview was taken, was in Art Academy, Florence Classical Arts Academy, that I work for and that I represent here in the U.S. And maybe you can put a link below for people to be able to find out about our classical art revival, Renaissance, as we would term it, the second Renaissance that we are attempting to conduct in this difficult cultural crisis. But I won't talk about this much. But Andrei has joined us in the academy for the interview that you'll get a chance to see and find out more. If you're interested in the academy and studying real classical art, the way it's been taught for centuries, you're welcome to visit the site. Also use my name as a reference. That will be sufficient to get in touch and communication on that, and get some perks and your tuition and things that you might enjoy if you decide to join Art Renaissance in Florence.
All right, let's get into it, because this is a long requested analysis. A lot of the people in my audience, a lot of the film buffs have come to my site and my channel and all that, come through movies, and they come through symbolism in film and philosophical films and so forth. And so for many years people had said, do Tarkovsky, do Tarkovsky, and I put it off for so long, and I took many notes over the years as I would watch different films. And of course, I started with Actually, I watched Solaris a long time ago, and I didn't really understand it. I think back when I was in high school, I watched the original Solaris, and then I watched,
Wow.
and then I went to Rublev, and then I went to Stalker, and then others after that. And we may not follow that ordering in our series. We're going to do the documentary, then we're going to start with Sacrifice, and then Rublev. All of which are going to be really difficult and require quite a bit of analysis. But so the first thing that I noticed as I was watching this documentary, which covers really his whole life and his work, his canon, we could say, which is actually not that long for those that are interested. It's basically, chronologically speaking, Ivan's childhood, Andrei Rublev, Solaris, Mirror, Stalker, Nostalgia, and Sacrifice. That's the notable works that we're going to be going through, not in that order. But so he started out by talking about being influenced by poetry and film as poetry, and that soon connected to film as icon, and I think that makes a lot of sense with Rublev. But I didn't realize, as I mentioned to him when we were interviewing, that his father was so into poetry, and there was such a literary influence, and literary references are sprinkled throughout the movies as well. So I just wanted to reemphasize that poetry element, which he went quite a bit into. He went pretty deep into explaining that poetry was a way to speak that a lot of other forms of art maybe can't do, or they're limited. And likewise, he saw cinema as a way to play with time and to speak in a lot of ways that other types of art can't do as well. So, and I asked, why, why cinema and not poetry? And he said, well, if his grandfather turned out to be one of the most famous Russian poets of the 20th century, then he needed his father needed a way to sort of distinguish himself in his own right. And so he found cinema to be that unique style of art. So I'm glad that we got into all that, and the documentary kind of kicks off with that. But
Yes, we definitely covered a great deal on that topic, and we pointed out that his grandfather, Andrei's father, well, it's confusing because we have two Andreis. So we have Andrey Jr., who we interviewed, and his grandfather was really an influence on literal level for. I think it wasn't just the fact that he's trying to do something different, but I think in many respects, that an approach to art as poetry, which was emphasized by Andrei Tarkovsky, was very important, because he attempted to see poetry in every form of art, and in fact, he considered true art, no matter what it is, visual, painting, drawing, and of course film, and of course music, to be a form of poetry if it's real art. Because um, I sensed that we kind of covered that a lot in the interview, so we're not going to go deeply into it, but just to kind of give a reference to that, I think it had mm, to me, it has a scriptural element. The element of revelation always comes as a word, and I think we will see especially from the documentary itself, how Andrei speaks about his own films and his own approach to art as as a um, as a profession of faith, and as a verbal form of prayer that can become any other media, but in essence, in its spirit, we're still coming back to the word, and that's where poetry lives. Of course, that's a dimension of language, and so that we covered, and that we will come back to in our interview with Andrey Jr.
yeah, I like that he moved from talking about the influences to when it got into the influences, the themes in the films. The first one that came up, which is not what I expected, is memory, and that he dealt a lot with memory as an emotional structure, which I guess makes sense in terms of nostalgia. Why do you think memory played such an important role, and I guess time, in these films?
Oh, I think that he kind of connects memory also with dreams and with the personal living of one's life as in a way a kind of a canvas like uh, experience of recollecting his childhood memories, his formative periods in life. I think tapping deeply into inner dimensions of one's soul will inevitably. It's not like dwelling on memories in a kind of a destructive sense of leaving this reality, but I think everything that a human being, especially Andrei, I think goes back to his childhood a lot in the mirror specifically, where it goes very deeply into self-recollecting and autobiographic imagery. But I think through this memoriam, he enters an artistic dimension where he uses memory as his canvas, almost as his palette. I mean, as his instrumentarium, if you will, of various ways of expressing emotion, because memory is very personal, and his movies are very personal, and they're very personal because they're extremely honest. And that honesty, in a way, may be challenging to some degree, but and especially maybe to those that surrounded him at the time. I'm talking about maybe even colleagues, and he had a lot of jealousy surrounding him because his honesty is so bare. And his opening of his soul is almost like a confession that he performed for the world to see without exhibitionism. And at the same time, not a lot of artists can manage to step up to that level of honesty about their soul in any format. So I think that to me kind of resonates with memory, and maybe Andrei will have more to speak about that.
Yeah, so when he kicks it off with, I mean, I know there was the steamroller and the violin, or I think
Hmm.
that was the early one. But the first film proper is actually also a film school project, which a lot of people were really shocked that somebody in film school, even though I think he was in his mid to late 20s, I think, when he did Ivan's Childhood. That this really surprised people that somebody's first project could be that good. And this is a war film that's told in a different way. It's not like most war films. And in the documentary, they discussed that pretty early on, he seemed to have a kind of he was a strong personality who was opposed to war, and that even if there is an idea of a righteous cause in a war, in the end, everybody ends up losing in warfare. And I think that's kind of an overall a biblical perspective, right? Because um, you know, war. He would, I guess, his father would have been exposed to what World War I, and that must play into this, right? That
Well, actually, his father was not. I don't know. I don't believe he was participating in World War One. They were all growing up. His father was growing up in the period of World War One, the poet Arseny Tarkovsky, but he was actually drafted into the war during World War II and
oh,
went
okay.
through the actual battlefield experiences and lots of other experiences that are associated with true, real war combat realities. And he wrote poetry during those periods, and he wrote poetry after those periods that were war related, and we found out that his poetry wasn't published until late 50s. So he basically wrote poetry without hope or chance in a way of being read or heard by people, which is in a way also a great form of offering and service to art. But speaking about war and his Andrei's, the director's life experience, he was a child growing up at the time of World War II. Him and his mother were in the situation where they were in evacuation, and the lives of people were shattered and broken. There were all sorts of experiences that people have suffered in that generation, that after this we have kind of skipped, in the West at least, and in Russia, we have skipped several generations where we didn't have this threat, and we didn't have this real experience of direct war. We had atomic threat that we'll talk about some more in other context of another film. But Ivan's childhood is definitely, the Soviets labeled it as a pacifist
Right.
attitude. Now, Andrei's attitude was definitely such that war cannot have real winners, that everybody, even those who win in the war, losing because of the sufferings. And he opposed war as an idea, and it is very biblical. And he uses faculties of dreams and memories in Ivan's childhood as a way of entering that inner world of a child,
Right.
young boy, who is actually the main character. And we, of course, will go deeply into it, but when we God willing get to this film with Andrei. But when we see his inner life, his inner experience of war, of the Ivan, of the main character, it is extremely unique. It's a breakthrough in a way, because he's bringing a person into experience a war that isn't objective. It's subjective experience, and it's done through the eyes of a child, and a dreamlike experience. So it is, I think it's very powerful and very timely film, because we are obviously in the midst of very, very bad war situation. And in this case, the war is happening between even people who basically spoke the same language up until 10-20 years ago. Some people may refuse to say we're the same, they are the same nation, and that they are the same people. And I'm not going to have any statements on that. I'm just it is clear that at least we're definitely sharing so much of that culture. And now the tragedy, I mean, almost, uh, you know 20% of Russians have some relatives in Ukraine, and vice versa. That wasn't the case in World War II. Doesn't make it better or worse, but this is almost like a civil experience as well. So there's in the midst of this tragedy, we can turn back to these movies, and maybe receive some message that will help us heal, and will help us to focus on peace as the main objective, as much as possible, and pray to God that it is granted to the world.
Yes. One of the reasons that I was a little confused about whether it was World War One or World War Two is because I wasn't sure at different points whether at the very beginning of the documentary it was talking about the grandfather or Andre himself, because I was watching an English translation. The English was a little confusing, but if you watch it at the Criterion Collection, it'll probably be fine. But the so one thing that was odd was that Jean-Paul Sartre defended this film, which of course we know who he is on our channel because we've covered a lot of philosophy. But this existentialist atheist guy defending this film, and then I laughed at the response that he gave in the documentary, which was that, well, it didn't do me any good, and I don't really care because I'm not a philosopher. And yet we have this progression right towards the end of his life where the films get really, really heavily philosophical. They're really dealing with heavy philosophical topics. And even the next film, Rublev, which my take on Rublev, I took a whole bunch of notes on it. I took about 8 pages for every one of these. But Rublev
Hmm.
is seems to be a kind of an
Yeah,
encapsulation of the hit.
me too. I have my notes to show it. Yeah, this is a whole study course, and I think, and I hope by the end of this series, we will share a legacy of culture that these films carry across that is unparalleled. I think when you mentioned, I just want to come back to the thought before I lose it, is that he did make that statement. He said, I'm not a philosopher, I'm an artist. I think Andrei Rublev, I mean, I think Andrei Tarkovsky is actually the type of artist, type of person who makes a lot of these very powerful statements. He loves to make intense statements in general. His way of expression. So when he says, "I am an artist, I'm not a philosopher," doesn't is not to be taken literally, because I think he's definitely a philosopher, but he always puts for himself, for his expression, he puts arts first, poetry first. So he's by stating that, I think he's saying, I am going the path that is I guess what the unspeakable, in a way that cannot be expressed simply by logic. But I think he is definitely over exaggerating the fact that he has nothing to do with philosophy. In fact, I think you will see a lot of philosophy now. Back to Andrei Rublev, theology, right?
Yeah, I took it to be kind of an encapsulation of the history of the Russian people in a film. Is that kind of what you think overall it's supposed? I mean, in all the elements as well, right? Iconography, orthodoxy, battles, warfare, modernity. I mean, all of these things kind of come into that.
Even the pagan
Oh
pagan
yeah, yeah,
cultural
right,
roots, and that affect, and the culture of Russian folklore, and but most definitely, I think this film is a reflection of a Russian soul, of a Russian Orthodox culture, that's, again, it captures it in a very broad sense, and in ability to show the tragedy of a Russian soul. It's very Dostoevskian,
yeah,
and
exactly,
we talked about that. We came back to that in conversation with Andrei, and he said that Dostoevsky, he wanted to make Dostoevsky films, but all of his films are, in a way, a very major way, Dostoevskian. And
right.
he had a lot to say on that. And I actually thought, down the line in the future, we might, as an addition to our ontology, we might actually have a focused conversation specifically on Tarkovsky and Dostoevsky relationship as a separate, even
Yeah. Oh,
conversation.
we should. We should. Yeah, I did an interview with two of my friends recently on different. I did with Mark Haggard and Tristan Haggard both joined me recently. We did a whole talk on demons, the Dostoevsky demons, Crime
Mhm.
and Punishment, and elements of Brothers Karamazov. So, yeah,
And
that would. Yep.
as you know, he did, and we may have known that he did a play in theater with almost the same film, with same actors that are in his films, consistently. That was Idiot, Dostoevsky's, one of his masterpieces. That was actually, interestingly, linking up to that. I thought I'd bring it up. Did Dostoevsky worked on it for quite some time, living in Florence, right nearby where Tarkovsky's apartment
Oh
ended up
wow.
being after his. Yeah, so not a lot of people know that he didn't work on Idiot all the time in Florence, but he came there for extended period and finished it. He almost had to take a step out of Russian reality, I think, to, in a way, to kind of express the inner process that he did. I'm not going to get into Dostoevsky now, but coming back to Andrei Rublev, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a distillation. It's an essence of many aspects of Russian reality. The and the tragedy and the beauty, and the spiritual and the soul, and the contrast in some way between the West, and a connection the West to Russia, and Russia even Russia's influence on the West that is continued in this film, because this film cannot leave anybody indifferent, and it shows the historic struggles, the occupation by the tribes of the Mongols, and many things that are placed in such, again, poetic form. This film, to me, is really uh, I mean, I wouldn't. I don't mean to me. It's a form of a spiritual experience for sure, and it's very honest, and it's very deep, and has so many layers of depth and revelation within it, that I think any person who wants to connect to that essence of Russia, that is beyond politics or context of things that are happening in a cultural climate that is happening now, that is extremely Russophobic, because of the events that are taking place, and it may be justifiable to a degree for people living outside of it, but it would be really sad if everything that has to do with Russia was viewed as evil and threatening, because it has such an immense gift for the world that should not be washed away by events that are taking place in the world right now.
So the next element I want to get to that we got to a little bit of this in terms of the subversion that happened at the 1980, I think 1983 Cannes Film Festival, where he was kind of subverted. But so the Soviet authorities, now we're getting into the period of the Cold War, and we get the Soviet censors, and they take obviously a lot of interest in his films, and they were not very happy with Rublev, which he had to, I think that the documentary says, keep editing to get it to where it was acceptable, because the Soviets, the authorities said it was too individualistic. So the protagonist was too much of an emotionally, existentially motivated artist. So he was too individualistic, and this sort of contrast.
Well, he was also a monk. He was an
yeah,
artist
the
and a
religious
monk.
element, right, the religious element. Yeah.
And I think first of all, well, of course, religious, but also the fact that he's a monk, it means that monk is is a solitary being, in a
Yep.
way of abandoning that kind of social strata, for the sake of finding that path. So historically, it was true to the fact that yes, he's an individualistic seeker, and his I think Andrei Jr. mentioned something that I didn't realize, that was the only film that was censored, which is in a way censored in a way where it was cut and cut and cut. Somehow miraculously, all the other films that were made in Russia, which I think there were 5, right, and he made them in like 20 years, so they would constantly stifle his ability to make films. He felt that he could have made 4 times the films, he just constantly met resistance, but he wouldn't budge on the content of the films that he released. So all those films, like The Mirror, like Ivan's Childhood, they were not censored. So scenes were not cut out because of the censorship. They were cut out because of his own personal artistic vision. But in Andrei Rublev, that did happen, which brings us to a very important and exciting news bleep that we got from Andrei, that there is a new version that's coming out that is uncut, and it has there are uncut versions that already came out, but this one is in some way unique. It's digitally remastered, but it's also carrying original intent of the director that is kept. So I think they got an extra 10 or over 10 minutes of time added. And, in a context of 2 hours may seem like unimportant, but there are certain key moments. There are plot junctions that could be diffusing the whole spiritual power of the film that were taken out in the very special places that kind of it didn't collapse the overall picture, but it definitely it's like highlights in a painting or fine layers that sometimes get cleared out by bad restoration, and you kind of get this flat image instead of a beautiful impression. So in a way that suffered to some degree, and we will soon, by the end of this year, beginning of the next, hopefully we'll have access to a new beautiful version of this masterpiece.
Yeah, well, another parallel to today, right? I mean, today we live in this climate where, the arts are dominated by a total, almost demonic level of inversion. You have to have, total degeneracy everywhere in your art, or it's censored, or you're banned, you're canceled. I mean, it's even crazier than what censorship would have existed back at that time. So I'm just saying it's another parallel with how the arts work now, almost to some other extreme. But
Well, yes, I mean, it's almost parallel. It's almost exact in many ways. I mean, I haven't gone to a film school, but I did have experiences in some schools in United States because I'm an artist by my first education. And at the time when I went to school, that was, not that old, but it was over 20 years ago. And even at that time, we had, well, a void of spiritual content and encouragement of that type of subject matter whatsoever. But of course, also a total loss of tradition and academic training, which was also discouraged or not encouraged. As currently, it is discouraged and completely disconnected from, as well as the visionary and Christian, if you will, too, themes.
right,
They're not really welcomed in the environment of the bohemian, postmodern sort of spheres. They
right,
are persecuted in a way, if you will.
yeah,
That's
absolutely,
not
yeah.
a strong word. I mean, it's reality.
Yeah, no, I mean, any movie with wholesome, decent, redemptive themes. I mean, that doesn't get made in Hollywood. I mean, really, it's only foreign films that in countries that have some remnant of Christianity where you get something decent. I mean, every now and then there's a gem in the rough. But the next element that I came up with in my notes that I thought was fascinating was that, in the midst of Rublev and even some of the other movies that he did, was the philosophical positions that, for example, he says in the documentary, you cannot separate the culture of a people and their religion. They're different things, but they're interrelated. The religion, you can't have a culture without some kind of transcendent foundation. So I like that he talked about the necessity of that transcendent foundation. He talked about art. He didn't use this theological term, but I think that this is what he was trying to say. And when we talked to Andrey Jr., he said that this is what he was trying to say, which is that art is a way to teach truth. And in that same way, like theology, art is apophatic. And by that, what we mean in theology is that we can't directly define or give a positive attribution to the divine essence. We speak in an apophatic way about what it is not. The via negativa is what it's called in Western theology. And so in the same way, art, because it is expressing the eternal, expressing the divine, art is also kind of apophatic in that it speaks, but it also conceals at the same time. And so art, just
Mhm.
like iconography, speaks of the eternal, but it also conceals at the same time, because it can't be completely rationalized or conceptualized perfectly. You can have rational elements of iconography, but it's not defined. It's not exhaustive in the word that is spoken.
Agreed. I think he also emphasized, I remember him emphasizing very much the fact that when iconographer painted his work, was never signed, or up until maybe very recently, but really generally it isn't signed, which he highlighted very much, and he spoke about the absence of ego in the creation of that type of work, because that work was a manifestation of spiritual effort and prayer, and it cannot happen with unless it's selfless. And he made a very clear statement we spoke about, but it's worth repeating, that the true art is selfless, and he used the word service as being a synonym to that format. Is selfless, and service as a form of expression can only bear pure and real fruits. When there is ego present, that's self-serving. It's then a way of which is really what we see now in the postmodern realm, is that it's all about self-aggrandization, and there is that great confusion between the human element that I think Andrei Tarkovsky is emphasizing, because to him the anthropomorphic element that is almost theological is this human realm, where it is presented without attempts to bring yourself in an egotistical sense forward, but is shown as lived, as different degrees of human suffering, human relationship, tragedy of divorce, that he's showing in a very, very beautiful way, tragedy of war, tragedy of different maybe romantic relationships, obviously, and relationship to one's own country, patriotic relationships, all these very deep personal things that are very human, are attempted to be brought to a level of a higher spiritual context, and that's what his art is filled with. So it is a form of again, yes, I guess apophatic, because maybe we can't speak about human God in a direct way, but we can speak about human dimensions that are being purified in this attitude and this vision.
Yeah, exactly. Two things there that I had in my notes. One was that the artist has replaced the art. So it used to be about the creation, focusing on the creation of the artist, pointing towards the divine. That was the point of what goes on with iconography in the church. And then now, with the decline and loss of the transcendent in the realm of the arts, which is pretty much everywhere in the arts, now you have it replaced with man. Man is the measure, as Pythagoras says, the pre-Socratics. And so what happens then is that now it's about the artist, right? It becomes almost a corporate sort of controlled thing where you're just selling yourself and not promoting something beyond the self. And I mean, even atheists like, what's her name? Freaking crazy, what's her face?
Abramovich.
No, well,
She's another
she's
postmodern.
yeah, that's a
performing
great
artist.
example. But no, even Ayn Rand wrote a book on aesthetics, and she actually critiqued this idea of the arts. As an atheist herself, she could recognize the foolishness of saying that, arts are really just a representation of subjective emotions, just merely the man-focused, man-centered emotionalism. She said it was a problem because you have to have some objective ideas of beauty, of form and composition and balance, symphonia. All of those things have to be present in art. I'm just pointing out that it's odd that even an atheist can recognize that, and yet here we are, where now nothing is art and everything is art. Again, that postmodernism that you're talking about. So I had notes on that, and another thing that was cool that he brought up was the in the documentary that when we talked to Andrey Jr., he confirmed that this was really a big part of this, was that if you think about icon writing, not painting, but writing icons, that he called it a pure.
I'm glad you pointed it out. I'm glad you pointed it out, because at least in Russian, they don't say I paint an icon, I write an icon, which brings us back to prayer and poetry again.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. That the mysterious. I'll let you have it after this point. The world is actually mysterious or sacramental. It's a mysterion, same word that Paul uses for the sacraments, right? The mysteries. The world is mysterious because the world is a kind of icon, and icons are not just intellectual or artsy. They're actually spoken word or prayer, and that's the whole point of the documentary, is a cinema prayer, right? Cinema is a kind of iconographic presentation that's also a kind of prayer.
Well, absolutely. I think in a broader sense, everything, basket weaving that, holy fathers would perform with Jesus' prayer, and the desert fathers of the first centuries used to, spend their days making baskets in the deserts and then selling them at the marketplace just to support their monastic existence. And of course, Apostle Paul, who used to make tents. I mean, all those things made can be made in prayer, with prayer, and as a prayer, and they can be they could be things of extreme beauty, but they could be also things of, it doesn't matter what they are. I think the point is that of course they are all and Tarkovsky talks about it in documentary. He has a quote there somewhere that he talks about, it doesn't matter who you are and what you're doing. It really is about the spirit that you're doing it in, that makes it either fake or even worse, an atrocity, or it makes it beautiful, and beautiful by essence. It's even like growing a vegetable. It's like a tomato that you grew in your own garden versus some hydroponic engineered something that will be something else. It's I think we have the idea of nature also coming in the movies as well, that you're probably going to mention. So yes, take it from
Yes.
here, I guess.
Art, I'm not sure if I wrote this quote down right, but something to the effect of, again, I was watching an English translation, which I'm not sure was completely accurate, but art is pure metaphysics, bridging heaven and earth. Earth is the goal of the artist. The artist is sort of horizontally focused, but the art that he makes is then to, sort of point beyond. And he says that we imitate God by being creative. Creativity is a power that humans possess, being made in the image of God. That's fundamental um, to that imaging. And the word, of course, in the text of Scripture is the icon, right? Man is the icon of God. And so, in being a creator, the artist imitates God to be a little creator, which, as part of Orthodox theology, theosis, we become, in an even greater sense, a co-creator with God. All of that I thought was fascinating. That sort of comes up, I think, throughout Rublev. We talked about art being selfless. It should be. Next, the documentary moved on to talk about Solaris. And he went into the fact this is a science fiction story that's not your typical science fiction story. And really, most of Rublev's films are very much, they're not commercial Hollywood films.
Tarkovsky's
Excuse me. Yeah,
yeah,
Tarkovsky's films are.
it happens to me all the time now.
Yeah, thank you. They're not commercial Hollywood types of films. They're much more, like you were saying. This could be a whole course, a film course, right? It's more like what you would study in film school than anything you would watch, out of Hollywood. And the people are asking the questions in the chat. The answer to your question is that we plan to do an interview on each of the films. So there'll be an interview on each of these. So yes, there will be an interview on Rublev as well as the others. So this is just an
Yes, and
introduction.
the interview will be with Andrei Tarkovsky Jr., three of us, and we got an absolutely unique and maybe unprecedented in some way, God willing, opportunity to go into these films with a witness who is probably one of the, I'm not going to diminish all Tarkovsky experts. With much respect, there are people who dedicate their lives to studying Tarkovsky as a phenomena, just like there are people who study Shakespeare as and other great masters. And I would definitely draw that parallel in cinema for him, with no doubt. But just to make it clear, the format that we're about to approach will be with a witness, with his son, who inherited all of the reels and has a great fund, and it's kept by the Ministry of Culture in Italy, in Florence, and he presides over that. And his mission and his life is to speak on and popularize, in a way, as much as it can be called popular culture. It's certainly not a pop type of
Right.
art,
Right.
but unfortunately, because human beings can relate to it. And that brings me, before I forget, to the beautiful example. Do you remember when he talks about the scene in the mirror in the movie, where they had this whole showing of the film that was kind of closed, but they had it in some theater, and there are all these people that came to see. Of course, you had no internet, you had no way of seeing it except when it was shown in a theater, and it was shown for closed audiences. And they kept talking about the meaning of these scenes, and there was this lady that was cleaning the floor as they were supposed to be already leaving, but they kept staying around. And this janitor lady, old lady, said, I don't know what's so complicated. A person is sick and dying, and he's looking at his life and how much bad things, how much crap he's done, and he is basically repenting. That's what the movie is about. What do you want? What are you talking about this for so long? And I think it's brilliant. And it kind of comes back to the fact that it doesn't. You don't have to be, a great intellectual, sort of sophisticate to grasp the beauty of things. As he says, what does it mean when a bird sits on the top of somebody's head? And he goes, well, just the bird won't sit on top of a bad person's head.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that, sometimes things in Tarkovsky are simpler than we want to make them. They're as beautiful and simple as certain things that we see in the gospel sometimes. And in my opinion, it sort of transmits that beauty and purity in very many ways.
Yeah, I think at one point he said something like, a lot of the films are not intended to be philosophically defined and explained. He says you can do that, but really it's meant to be experienced. And I think that's something that also kind of resonates from the Orthodox ethos from which he comes, which is that, God isn't primarily something that we list a bunch of facts about, but rather something that's a direct experience, in the liturgy, right? So I like that part of that came up as well. But he said that Solaris, the first thing that came out was that Russians are tied to nature. And one of the elements that unites all of his films, and I think it's present in Solaris too, right, is that all of the characters the main characters are undergoing an intense spiritual crisis. What do I've never really had much of a connection with Solaris. Maybe it's because I just still don't get it. But and I've never read that original sci-fi novel. So what do you think about Solaris?
Well, first of all, as far as original novels and Tarkovsky films, we have to clearly make a point that they're not, from book to screen type of, like, Lord of the Rings
Sure.
type of
Right.
films that are made in attempts to really reproduce the books. They're almost like complete, in the modern term, remixes of the original. The original ideas are very often taken much further and much further away from the originals. And in fact, Stanislav Lem, the sci-fi writer that wrote the book, disapproved of what Tarkovsky did. And
Oh, wow.
that may or may not, I mean, I think it hurt him to some point, but he was sad that he misunderstood that Tarkovsky saw. I think Tarkovsky saw certain things in that book that he's taken deeper and further. We don't know. I mean, what all the details. We can talk and ask Andrei again. That's why we have such an amazing opportunity to ask his son. It's like, what did your father think about that?
Right.
What did he? I mean, this is like, just just precious. And I thank God that we have what we're having. This is what we're having, you and I, right now. We're still kind of speculating on things, and we reflect on some things that are being said. And
Right.
this is why this cinema as prayer is so important. And I can't overemphasize it for our viewers, because I think that this film holds a lot of keys, holds a lot of
Right.
it helps. It's like a vocabulary. It's a language, and it's in the artist's own words. Because in that documentary, you don't hear a single word by his son who made the film. All you hear is the recording of the voice of the father, the director, who's speaking about his personal life philosophy, his view, his vision. And what struck me, I mean, to the core, which I didn't realize after watching this film, by the way, several times, trying to take notes, and still it's slipping from my, overall ability to hold this whole worldview that Tarkovsky expresses in this film. What shocked me and touched me at the same time is that most of the things that you hear in the background, even if you don't speak Russian, but you see the text and the subtitles, were recorded 6 months before his death. And he knew that he was dying, and he knew it was inevitable. So we're having this type of very, very personal and honest expression of a human being's a view that has very little, like with Nathaniel in gospel story. Like, it's not crooked. It just has a person is speaking before the face of death, and speaks very deeply and very peacefully about certain things, including death itself. But beyond that, he's giving us the keys to understand his art as much as it can be understood, which is another paradox, because he's constantly saying he is full of paradoxes. Like, you started your sentence with nature being very close to Russian people. And if Tarkovsky says Russian people are so close to nature like no one else. And I mean, it's a very, very beautiful exaggeration, because of course, I mean, we have people in every culture. And I think from the East contemplating nature, from the West, we can't say it's a Russian thing to love nature. I think, but I think he loves nature so much that he says, it's something that,
Well,
is very important to
yeah.
Russian people. And
Well,
I agree.
he goes on to say that, maybe to be more precise, that nature isn't that important in films in the West. So I think that
Oh,
maybe
yes.
that was the context that he meant it. And the more I thought about, I never really thought about that, but the more I thought about it, like, yeah, in Western, Hollywood cinema, you don't typically have much of an importance for nature. But I think that because nature in the West is seen as just sort of dead matter, and it's just, the process of death and decay. But
Well, it
in
doesn't have emotional
Yeah,
content,
exactly.
and it doesn't have the grab on and shake you up type of
Well, but it should.
attention grabbing.
It should, though. That's what I'm saying, is that
Yes,
if nature is resacralized and not desacralized or demystified, then if it does retain that mysticism that it should have, then it makes sense why it would be so prevalent in his films. I mean,
I
it's
agree. I agree. I think when he, in a context of time that he was coming through, and I totally agree with your observation here, he was breaking ground. He was daring to show nature as beauty in itself within the context of the story, like in Solaris, for example. I mean, I don't want to talk about Solaris in too much detail, because we're gonna, God willing, get to a point where we will be dedicating an
right.
entire speech to 2 hours or more to breaking it up and going deeper in. But I mean, you definitely have that longing in nature, that longing for, maybe for even Eden. And
Yes.
the main character is leaving Earth, is going to some space station, and to him, this you know feeling of earth, feeling of natural, the forest, of these beautiful scenes that the fields, the smell of grasses, all of those experiences are, brought into a very deep sense of what it means to be human being and be part of nature. And he even goes further, and he says in a documentary that nature it is first. We are result of nature. I don't think he means it in a Darwinian sense that we're product of evolution and survival of the species in its most materialistic form. But I think he's still pointing out that we are definitely part of this creation, and God did create these things before he created us. So by having that connection with them, we begin to connect with the one who created us as well. But of course, we don't need to go to worship trees in order to
Right.
find
Yeah.
consolation and spiritual experience.
Well, man is alienated from nature, and I don't mean that in a Karl Marx sense. I mean in a spiritual sense, in that man has adopted a view, at least since the Renaissance, Enlightenment, scientific revolution, that the natural world is dead matter, right? And that's actually an occultic hermetic idea. It's not the Orthodox idea. In the Orthodox view, nature is a theophany itself. It's also a divine manifestation. It's not itself divine, but it manifests the divine, and at least it should manifest the divine. And so I think part of what he's talking about here is that danger, the critique of a technocratic future, which we did get into that. I asked him some questions about that because, in Stalker, for example, we have this, post-apocalyptic scenario, and, Andrey Sr. goes on to talk about how in one of those lectures that he gave that the book of Revelation was his favorite because it was the greatest work of poetry. Of course, it's also an end times warning. And so is there this notion of that we're coming to the end of an age? I mean, I know he was there in the Cold War, and there's the threat of, mutually assured destruction and all that.
Destruction.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that threat always lives on, even if I mean there's just the presence of plutonium and in the world in these amounts is a constant reminder that we're on on edge of life and death at all times. But of course, when the situations activate, the threat of the cold of the nuclear war was felt very deeply, and it puts every generation to some degree face to face with and I don't want to use that word apocalypse, because apocalypse is it really means revelation
right.
of God, not a destructive collapse of everything we know and love, as usually we perceive. I was speaking, by the way, we are in parallel to this project, working on a project on the book of Revelation that is, if I may bring it up in the context of this conversation, that's called Apocalypse, the Book of Hope, that we're doing, and hopefully will be airing in the next few weeks to a month from now as a sequence of lectures. And honestly, I didn't realize how much Tarkovsky, due to my ignorance perhaps in all his writings. I started reading more intensely his writings in the past year, preparing for this, and I read his diaries and his martyrologue, and then his speech on apocalypse, which blew my mind because we already started to work on the book of Revelation as a book of hope. And his statement, it's the most important book ever written, and didn't just shock me. I mean, I agree with it, but it confirmed for me that these two themes are going hand in hand, and his work is very much inspired by apocalypse. In Ivan's childhood, we'll see Dürer's engravings of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. We see the theme of the apocalypse, a revelation, use that positive term because that's what it is, appearing, and I think he saw it as that as well. I don't think he saw it as a warning. He saw it as poetry. He saw it as a most beautiful, again underlining the most important work of literature ever written, quote Tarkovsky. So I think it's so important that people come back to exploring that book, but it's clear that we need to have a certain understanding of how to read it, how to understand it, and maybe how to feel it. But that will be an attempt made by some 12 interviews that we will hopefully be doing with Veronica Androsova, who is a professor of theology, who does speak English, who is teaching in Russian St. Tikhon University Orthodox School of Theology, but she is going to come and share with us the book that she wrote with that name, Apocalypse, the Book of Hope of 12 Lessons. And this is very exciting, and I think it'll have a synergy with the lectures and meetings with Andrei Tarkovsky and his films.
Yeah, the next element that I noticed that stuck out to me was the well, I'm going to save the telekinesis and the levitation type of thing until later on when we do Stalker. But um, the he did have an influence from Thoreau. He was a big fan of Thoreau and I guess the Transcendentalists and the idea of life in the woods. And I think that he seems to be getting at the point that Western man. He makes this statement that you can be in the West after he gets exiled from Russia. You can be in the West and still be a prisoner, and yet, or you can live under a tyrannical government and be free on the inside. So, freedom isn't primarily a political thing. As I think is the point, is that freedom is a spiritual thing, which you can again be free even under a tyrannical government, and you can be in the West and be quote free, but enslaved or kind of trapped in false ideologies or consumerism or whatever. So I thought those were some pretty profound, perceptive, kind of seeing through simplistic ideas of the Cold War. But after 1983, when he goes to Cannes Film Festival, and the Soviets didn't like nostalgia and they didn't want that to win, right? So they sort of undermined him there. And then he, not too long after that, doesn't he end up having to go to Italy, right? He has to basically leave Russia.
Yes, yeah. Well, the political climate in the context of this experience, we have, what they called in Russia during period of Khrushchev, and who doesn't know who Khrushchev is definitely knows who Kennedy is, and that was happening at the same time. And now maybe to some people, the notion of the Caribbean, crisis and Cuba and missiles being brought to Cuba by Russians, and I mean, we were on the verge of a real catastrophic conflict between U.S. and Russia primarily, and that was all happening during Khrushchev's time. But at the same time, internally in Russia during Khrushchev's rule, compared to what was happening at the Stalin regime, there was what they called a warming up. Like you wouldn't
Is
go to
this
jail for
the
being
thaw? There was a phrase used, the Khrushchev thaw.
thaw. Yeah, I
Okay.
guess that's the term where ice melts, but it doesn't melt entirely. Just like the sun comes out, the little flowers pop out a little bit, but then the freezing cold comes back. And Tarkovsky caught that point, and that's exactly where he was talking about making. Some of his films were made during that time, and they were allowed to be existing, and certain draconic laws that, like I was using the example, like you could go to jail for being late to work, and so on. I mean, those are things that are going on during Stalin's rule. Of course, I'm not talking about being repressions for creative expression or religious themes, but at the same time, Khrushchev's regime cracked down on the church as never before. So there were all these kind of contradictions within this regime, but in that context, still Khrushchev let out a certain freedom, and that freedom enabled these films to be made. Then Khrushchev stopped being the head of Russian bureau of the Soviet Politburo, and basically like the head of our Senate in the context of whatever they have, but they had only one party, of course, and that was the Communist Party. However, he was the head of that, and once he left, things started to collapse or tighten up. I would say not collapse, but they began to tighten up very, very quickly, and that's exactly what happened in Cannes Film Festival, where one prominent Russian directors came there and did everything possible to influence the jury and shut down his film. And for Tarkovsky, living under that censorship and pressure was tremendous, tremendous suffering. He didn't get any financial support. I mean, he lived on the edge of constant poverty and uncertainty, just simply for survival purposes, because they kept, even during the time when they allowed him to make films, they still didn't allow him to make. And that wasn't the case just with him, but a case with a lot of great artists and poets and musicians in Russia that could make albums and make films and would not, would see like $1,000 for something they could be making for 3 years, and they didn't do it for money. And that was I think part of it, what you mentioned, the freedom that came through absolute dedication and suffering that was honest, and repression and fearlessness. And every movie, and he uses that term, to me, every movie is an act. It was an act. It was you put everything on the line, including even your freedom. You didn't know what could happen to you next. But in Venice, he was clearly told that these movies are not going to be being made anymore in Russia, and they're never going to get through the film festivals because they influenced even the decisions of the festival in Italy, with the powers that they had to make these, which is mind-boggling. So yes, it's a war on creativity and humanity and God.
Right. Exactly. Um, he also, towards the end of the documentary, there's some great quotes where he kind of predicts a rebirth of spirituality in Russia, which I thought was pretty fascinating. There was some statements to Andrey Jr. about that technology is dangerous. Man is in danger. There's a chapter in my first book where I talked about how knowledge without wisdom is very dangerous, especially when it comes to technology. And so he basically agreed with that whole. I mean, he more or less said what I put as the chapter in my book, that if we don't have wisdom, if we don't have virtue, then having a whole bunch of knowledge, which basically we're just a bunch of mad scientists, right? I mean, there's a danger in the technology running wild, and so that seems to be kind of a theme present here, because he talked about ecological crisis at the end of the documentary, which I don't think he means like the scam green movement. I think he means like the real Chernobyl and these kinds of things that existed back at that time.
Well, absolutely. I think on one level, I mean, you'd be amazed at the ecological devastation that was happening in Soviet Union,
Right.
that was with the censorship and complete control of the media there. I mean, they continue to devastate natural resources and pollute without any checks or balances, without any reports to the people, and people simply didn't know what they were dumping into the water and
Right.
what they were doing when they started to like explore and reveal these ecological crises. And of course, radiation started to be one of the everything else seemed like little toys compared to potential of the atomic contamination and chain reaction and mutation contaminated population, as Kraftwerk had well put it in their famous song about Madame Curie. And I think that was and is, I mean, for all the thinking people, that was always a very deeply felt concern, especially once we moved into the abilities to and that reminds me of the I think Elon Musk said, if we were worried about atomic threat, I think he mentioned that artificial intelligences Again, as another, as like going from, dynamite to an atomic bomb, that we, and that's my analogy, but then we go into artificial intelligence. Is not even comparable to, I mean, how much do we have left, really? And it is not, greenhouse effect. Please, I mean, this is, we were talking about stuff that,
Yeah, way more serious than yeah.
is way more serious and way out of control for us.
So
Well, we do have God, and
yeah,
that's not a understatement.
so the that was pretty much the rest of the notes that I had from the documentary. We do have some super chat questions. Is there anything you wanted to leave us with in terms of the films? I think the next one that we're going to start with will be Sacrifice, right?
Yes. Well, we could endlessly talk about these things. I really like what Andrei pointed out, that the film is made in Swedish, um, but the term for sacrifice is offeret, in Swedish language, which is to us is very clearly read as offering. An offering is, of course, it's the um, it, uh, it comes to the sacrament, and it brings us to the sacrament of
Yeah.
Eucharistia, and epiclesis, and all of the liturgical notions. But I'm not trying to say that this movie is a liturgical movie. I'm trying to say that the notion of the offering, of course, is the central notion of the meaning of our salvation in Christ, and that movie goes so deeply into it, and yet it maintains a level of poeticism, and you can't just pin it down and say this is what this is about, but the name speaks for itself, and I think it's beautiful that we begin with the end, like Alpha and Omega, and
Yeah.
we're starting with the last film that almost sums up the message. And really, the truth is that all the Tarkovsky films are one film made
Right.
about different things within different sort of storylines, but the thread goes through it. So I'm very excited. The theme of that film, of course, has to do with nuclear threat.
Right.
So it is very felt in this time for us. It's no longer something that used to be happening. It's something that we're living through right now, and I think it's going to be very important to go deep into these issues, and for all of our viewers to become familiar with this culture that is transmitted in the films of Andrei Tarkovsky. And to me, it is a renaissance of his work. I think that if we wait another 10 years, it will fade into obscurity and be drowned by the clip mentality and hyper speed, total loss of attention span that is
Exactly.
also loss of ability to analyze or contemplate ourselves and even understand or feel
Right.
anything. So that's where we heading, and I think these films are a cure. And if people go into that form, of course, they will start to experience some healing, and that healing will hopefully lead to the most important and central theme, which is God, in these films. And my hope is, we all know, would be for them to look for the source of the inspiration, which is in the gospel, in Christ, and in the church.
Excellent. Yeah. If you guys want to support the stream tonight, of course, you can do so by sending super chats through Streamlabs. The link is in the show description and in the chat. And first one is Slowboy, $2. What is your opinion on Tolstoy? I'm not a fan of Tolstoy. I think he fell into a really weird heresy. I think the church of his time even said that his views were heterodox. I've not really tried to read Tolstoy. I enjoyed my Dostoevsky classes in grad school, but was he a Western asset? That I don't know. I don't know that he had any connection to any espionage work. Father Vladimir, do you have any opinions on Tolstoy?
Hmm. Well, I'm not a Tolstoy specialist or expert. I can say that he played a very important role in world literature. I know we are, he's considered one of the greatest writers. He's certainly one of the, perceived to be one of the geniuses of many levels. But this Sunday, in our Orthodox tradition, we celebrated the memory of the Optina elders. The Optina elders were contemporary holy fathers of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. They lived in Optina. They formed sort of these elder monks that dedicated all their life to monastic practice and way of life. When they started to retire, they formed this adjacent community of elders that lived in seclusion from the constant influx of pilgrims to Optina desert, as they call them. Though it's in the middle of the forests. The desert term is not about the sand, but about this desolation, about the internal ascent into Christ. But why I'm speaking about that. One of the Optian elders, Saint Ambrosius, for instance, was known to be a spiritual father in a way for Dostoevsky. Or spiritual father isn't something, somebody you confess to every week, in that term, or but he visited him several times in his life, and we know from very reliable sources that he had a tremendous his prayer and his presence, because that's what happens when a person comes in contact with a truly holy man who has come to know God in the true sense. Rossi Vopchina was a very sick man all his life. He even couldn't get up for decades and experienced constant illness. That kind of goes to the prosperity gospel. Yeah, if you're sick and something wrong with you, God doesn't love you. But this man's sufferings, physical ailments, had a very, very powerful clarity of spiritual compassion to people who came to him. And by his prayers, he wouldn't heal, but they healed. And Dostoevsky was one of those people that attested to it. And in fact, his character in Karamazov Brothers and is based on Saint Ambrose of Optina, one of the Optina elders. But as we know from some accounts of Optin elders, that Tolstoy also came to them and also was seeking spiritual counsel. And well, I don't know if we can be I wasn't recording that conversation, but from what we know from this the story of their meeting, that Saint Ambrose said that he had a very difficult conversations with this man, because with no judgment, he said he's very proud, and the pride is not, in a good sense, I guess we can be proud of our children and things like that, but it's talking about spiritual pride. And there are evidences, and I'm not going to raise my hand on Tolstoy and his grandness, but we do know that he observed the gospel in a sense of just he wasn't hiding that. To him it was something that you could edit, something that you could agree with, disagree with. It was something that you could put differently or even teach differently. So he saw himself as a not next to Christ, because I don't think he really saw Christ as a savior of the human. Saw him as a human thinker, just like himself, and maybe in that possibly was his greatest delusion, and that led maybe to, I know Saint John of Kronstadt criticized him greatly, and felt that he was a cause of almost all of the revolutionary ideas eventually that brewed on the Tolstoy's attitudes and ideas. But I mean, I'm not here to blacken his reputation and say he was all evil or something like that. I would say that he had a lot of very, very beautiful things that he wrote, But at the end of the day, we still have very we have some accounts of his repentance that are still anecdotal. There, I mean, I'm not a scholar of Tolstoy again, but I've seen some scholars from the Orthodox perspective, more modern perspective, still lean towards the fact that he did have some God clashes in his work, and I don't know about if it was driven by just political affiliations or something that was mentioned in this question. I just don't know about that. I can't answer that at all.
Storm the Cat for $5 says hello. Hey, what's up? Thank you so much. Slowboy $1. By the way, guys, if you do super chat, I will split the super chats tonight with Father Vladimir. Slowboy $1. Why was St. John Chrysostom against the theaters? He condemned them as pagan practices. Well, in that time, the going to the theater also included implicit or explicit worship of various pagan deities and other practices that we can't do. Some Orthodox priests are against the arts. No, I've never heard that. I don't know what Orthodox you're talking about. I've never heard of an Orthodox priest against the arts.
Well, I think it's a very broad statement. Arts, again, what they I'm against certain arts. I mean, I don't know what that they mean by that. There are arts that glorify God, and there are arts that defile God, and that even go further into very satanic directions. So, very broad statement.
Slowboy again for $2. Is Halloween pagan? I think the origins of Samhain are pagan. I think that Halloween actually has a Roman Catholic origin. Can we participate in terms of orthodoxy? I mean, I wouldn't celebrate the dead in that way, but I mean, you can do your prayers for the dead. You can, I don't think it's wrong to go to a party, but I wouldn't celebrate the, Samhain and these kinds of things because those are pagan. What is your opinion of Carl Jung? My opinion of Carl Jung is that he's more or less kind of a watered down version of Plato. Carl Jung said he was very much a Gnostic. Most of his stuff is kind of borrowed from ancient Gnosticism and Platonism. So there's some interesting essays and theories that he has when it comes to literary analysis and archetypes. But again, that's really just from Plato. So I'm not a huge fan of Carl Jung, but I think you can, look at some of his pattern recognition, so to speak. I don't know, Father Vladimir, if you have any views of Carl Jung.
Well, again, not a specialist on him, but I think the notion of collective unconscious and observation of certain cultural tendencies that existed in separate, maybe unrelated to each other cultures is a testimony of one consciousness that governs and guides humanity to salvation can be viewed in various ways, and one of them can be an attachment to the project of salvation of humanity by God that is more than a project, but an act of love and connectedness of human cultures. Just definitely very well discovered and worked in that direction by Jung. I think I think is a very valuable thinker and very valuable researcher, and I think there's some things that we can definitely benefit from. And then even then going to the archetypes and things like that, again, they don't have to become opposed to theology. They can be viewed in a context of theology, and I think when they are viewed that way, they are very healthy. But if they were viewed without that, just like everything else without God, becomes very quickly becomes perverted and destructive.
Anonymous $1. Was Tarkovsky a full-on pacifist? Isn't war at times preferable to enslavement, humiliation, genocide, etc.? I mean, I don't know specifically what his full philosophy of war was. I think the point is that even in the Orthodoxy, even though there might be a time where you do have to defend your nation, defend your people, it's still a tragedy, right? I mean, St. Basil says that war is not good it's a feature of the fallen world, but it's a kind of a necessary evil at times. So, I mean, I don't know Tarkovsky's position,
Mm.
but my assumption would be that he probably felt like, I mean, that's the Orthodox attitude, is that it's a necessary evil at times.
I don't think he commented at war from that angle. I think from what I saw and felt in his expression and artistic and personal verbal comment on war is that war is evil, is an event. War is tragedy. War is suffering, and yes, of course, it's a result of the fall. It's not something that God intended for human beings. And again, we talk a little bit about Cain and Abel, and it's easy to say, well, is he for? Does he say, well, we should defend our family or our country or things that are dear to us and take to arms? I think he's stepping into another realm where he says this is pain and tragedy, and this is what in many holy fathers' writings we see the cry for the world, as we talk about the Saint Silouan of Athens. It's very much resonant with the writings of Saint Sophrony Sakharov, who actually was witness of the First and the Second World War too. War is horrible, and cry of the soul and prayer is the one of the responses, even if you're involved in it willingly or unwillingly. That's another ethical question. But I think as a relationship to war, Tarkovsky was certainly a pacifist, proclaiming it to be very, very, very painful and bad.
King N $2. Is the Greek church bad? Is it only the Greek church in the United States? Are the priests and bishops of the Greek church liberal and corrupt? I think that every jurisdiction can have good and bad people. The Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in the United States tends to be fairly corrupt, in my view. But that doesn't mean that there aren't good people and brothers and sisters in those jurisdictions. But I would say that if you're looking for churches that tend to be a little more on the conservative side, traditional side, I would say look for a Rocourt Church, look for something in that vein. Slow Boy,
Absolutely.
yeah, Slow
Yes.
Boy, $2.
Yes.
Are there false saints? No, I don't think that the church has falsely given that title to anybody. Why did God protect Cain from killing other people? Well, I think that God shows mercy, as Jesus says in the Gospels, even to the upon the just and the unjust. So when God says that no one can kill Cain, that's again a demonstration that God is merciful to both the righteous and the wicked. And so even people who are being evil, God still has mercy upon them. That's exactly the point of that situation with Cain. And you said, does that debunk the death penalty? Well, no, it's a few chapters later where God tells Noah that you should have the death penalty. That's my view. Dancing Duck, $1. Is it? We got a bunch of questions for priests tonight. Is it immoral for a priest to be wealthy? I don't think it's inherently evil. It might be kind of unbecoming, but I don't think that's necessarily an evil to have money. No. Father Vladimir, is it bad? Is it evil for a priest to be rich?
I wouldn't know because I don't have any money, but personally, I think there can be a temptation in a sense that if, say, you're a parish priest and your parishioners are poor and hungry, and you're living in a four-story house with a pool and driving a Hummer or whatever, you're acting like someone who basically should follow the very simple gospel truth that uh, that we all know from the story of the man who says, "Oh my God, I got this harvest." You remember that story with the harvest of grain, and I don't know what am I gonna do with all this grain? I don't have anywhere to put it. I'm gonna build these new storehouses, this new containers to store it, and I'll be taken care of forever and ever. And then Christ says, then God steps in and says, you're a madman, your soul will be taken away from you tonight. And what's the meaning of this story? And if we look a little bit beyond the surface, we understand that he hasn't thought about giving it to anyone. He just thought about how to package and preserve it. So the nature of greed and the nature of well, not loving your neighbor as you love yourself, and all of those fundamental principles of Christ's teaching are thus challenged, especially if the servant of God lives in tremendous wealth while others are suffering. But again, it's all about balance. It doesn't mean that the priest should drive a car that's falling apart and live in a hut, and his children should be starving just so that everybody else is comfortable with it. There's a fine balance and a fine line, and there's a certain level of modesty that becomes a priest, not just because he should project certain image, but he should send a certain message. If I have extra, I should share it with others, and also share it sometimes in secret, and not as a spectacle, which is all in the gospel.
Moldy Apple, $3. Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Father Vladimir. Thank you, Moldy Apple. Nick, $3. I read an article in the New Yorker that presented Tarkovsky as an agnostic liberal. Was Tarkovsky very serious about his orthodoxy? Do we know what he believed politically? Does he have any of a traditionalist leaning?
Oh, I mean, that's not a mystery. I know what New York Times can write, but we can read what Tarkovsky writes, and if you don't have time to read or desire to, especially want to hear his voice attesting to his beliefs, you can watch the film that we're dedicating this additional several hours to discussing, where he speaks in his own words about his profession of faith, about his traditional values, about his faith and act of his films as really a film. Cinema as prayer is not a term that we came up with, or even Andrei Tarkovsky Jr. came up with. Those are the exact words of Tarkovsky. But to say, was he, this strict Orthodox traditionalist per se, would be an overstatement, because Tarkovsky did live in a Soviet period where it's another conversation, because you have to paint the picture that may not be easy to understand for a person living in, say, in America, where you have a church in every corner. We're talking about one church per cemetery per 100,000 kilometers that was allowed to bury some people, maybe, if they're not afraid to go and do that with the priest, unless they do that and get reported, they can lose their job and never get a degree in university if they go and baptize their child. So they do it at night in a bathtub, by inviting a priest to come secretly. Those were realities that lasted until mid 80s.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about total real desert, not in a good sense, of spiritual culture, of church culture, where you could go and be part of liturgical life, that was severed, destroyed, and in 1937, pretty much all the clergy was sacrificed, was shot or sent to death camps. So we're talking about one seminary school for the whole country. Now, in that climate, of course, a person wasn't, exposed to the Orthodox culture as we can, enjoy it in the West, and now, luckily, and thank God, has been given the right to exist in Russia and formal Soviet republics, and there, and every one, including Ukraine, that is very, very religious country as well, Orthodox country, and a birthplace of Orthodoxy for Russia. We have this reality emerging in the past 30 years. on that post-Soviet space, as they call it. So that's my apologetic to say, was Tarkovsky, living this kind of, systematic Orthodox, practical sense of life, observing all the fasts and going to church every Sunday. I don't know if he observed the fast. He may have. When you watch the documentary, though, you'll see shots of his home, documentary shots of his home, where you see icons, where you see images only. You don't see worldly paintings even there. You see sacred things like Vladimir's icon of the Mother of God. Vladimir's, that's what it's called. You can look it up to see this beautiful, incredible Byzantine icon that is one of the holy relics of Russia, for instance, that is present in the background of his room, in the Trinity. And if you watch Andrei Rublev, you'll understand that a person who is just observing Orthodox culture from outside as a tourist could never make that film, and you'll understand that. So yes, he read Holy Fathers. Yes, he believed in Christ, and yes, he considered himself Orthodox. But again, given that time and period of total atheism for generations, he was coming into Orthodoxy in a traditional sense towards the end of his life, and maybe in some periods of his life.
Well said. Key 10, $2. Does Orthodoxy have a position on art that is made by AI? I would say that there's nothing inherently evil, but I wouldn't call that art. You go on to say that there's a bunch of programs that are integrating these kinds of technologies, like versions of Photoshop. Yeah, I don't know that anything. There's nothing out there that's inherently evil, right? What exists, that what has being, God created it and has declared it good. It's the misuse of things that is what is evil. But I wouldn't call that art. I would just call it, like, programming. I mean, to me, art is something more specific and more precise than something that a random program generates. Anybody else? I don't see any other questions or comments. Thank you for this super chats. Like I said, I will be splitting these super chats tonight with Father Vladimir. So thank you guys so much. Do we know when we think that first one will be released? That interview that we did the other day, maybe a week or two?
Yes, we're doing our best and working as we have begun.
Yeah,
The
no
reason
rush.
why,
I'm just wondering.
yeah, no. I'm excited and I want to get it out. Sort of hot of the plate. We just had this very, very powerful, very beautiful, and very deep interview with Andrei. He was a wonderful person and definitely a worthy, continuation of that line of extremely special people, because we're tracking that line from his grandfather to the son, to the son, to the grandson, in his presence, and we're working. Why we're doing this edit? We're not actually taking out any, honestly, any of our conversation, because it happened in most perfect way. But what we're doing is we're adding a little bit of visual content to illustrate some things from the shots of the films, from the family life, that will definitely make this illustrated and help you to be part of this story a little bit more, much more, I think, because it won't be just abstract notions or terms, but you'll see who we're talking about, what we're talking about, and who those people were. And you will also get a huge benefit, and I hope enjoyment and spiritual nourishment, if you watch the actual documentary cinema prayer that is accessible and available. And Andrei talked about where to find it, and I think Jay posted.
Yeah, I have the link. The link is in the show description at Criterion Collection. If you want to find the real,
watch it,
real solid version of it. But
yes.
We had another super chat for $25. Rough Hands says, "Thank you guys," or thank you both. Well, thank you, Rough Hands, much appreciated.
Thank you.
If you guys would hit like and share, I want to remind you too that the show sponsor is Chalk.com, the best organic supplements that you can find, actually better than organic. I take my chalk supplements every day. I highly recommend the Action 2.0 if you're looking to just boost your overall energy levels. If you're looking to fix the nutrient deficient diets that we all have, I recommend the Daily. Daily is great for overall supplementation. We do have nutrient deficient diets, and you can make use of the promo code 50% off if you go to chalk.com. That's choq.com. They are the show sponsor. They've been great. We've had these guys as a sponsor for a year now. They've sent a lot of support my way. So if you guys want to support me and you want to support your own health, definitely go over to chalk.com. My favorite though is the Tongkat Ali, the Tongkat 100. That is rainforest sourced, 100% pure. They're very, very precise about their purity strictures there at chalk.com. And it is proven in peer review to boost testosterone. There's other things you could look into too, like the Shilajit or the ashwagandha for mental clarity. Jamie is a big fan of the Shilajit. So head on over to chalk.com. Use the promo code J50. That's JAY50 to get 50% off. You can also use the promo code J53LIFE. That's J53LIFE. Get a little more of a discount, and that's for recurring subscriptions. So you don't have to keep putting the information in every month. If you want to get more of it, you can just set it up to, easily automatically come to you every month. And I think you're going to want to do that because they are great products. We've been, again, selling it for a year now, and everybody's very satisfied. Also, you can get my books at the website, signed copies. I did just put out the new Accidental book, which is 600 pages of all of the philosophy and theology essays of the last 10 years. You can get signed copies at the site, as well as the Hollywood symbology books and much more. Father Vladimir is also working on a channel too, which he's going to be putting stuff up. I'm going to put that link as well if you want to subscribe to the channel that he's going to be working from in the near future. Some of the interviews and work that he does will also be put over there. So Artos, I believe, right, is what?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we've created a channel on YouTube that's called Artos, and all capital. It's basically going to have things that appear here on this show, but we're trying to expand into all the art and culture that is dedicated to glorifying our Creator and our Lord and Savior, and do as much as we can to promote the art that is divinely inspired. And Tarkovsky, in my opinion, is right there with the arts like that, and with the inspiration that hopefully we all can share. And of course, please do come to our channel and do sign to it, and we will keep updating it regularly with all the programs. And I want to thank Jay for being for, first of all, for his catechesis that he does in the internet space that is priceless, and I see the fruits of it on regular basis. I see people that come to Orthodoxy, and I attest, and we have many people who've come that it makes my job just very easy. Honestly, when I find out they watched your programs, all I have to do is basically, do some talking with them, but I have to explain to them most of the fundamental things about Orthodoxy, because they are all available through Jay's efforts, and very concise and very beautiful. And I think Orthodoxy is very expensive. It expands to communicate. People say, well, this view, Orthodoxy is Christian faith in its truest sense. And I think that anything that comes in to Orthodox worldview, from Dostoevsky to Tarkovsky, can be in the Orthodox spirit, and that is a spirit of beauty, decency, love, and of course the Holy Spirit that comes to each and every person to guide them to our Lord and Savior. God bless you all. Thank you.
We got one more question. Somebody sent $40. J Mel for $40. What is the state of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church? I have heard that Greeks politicized a few parishes and recognized them from under Russian jurisdiction. Will the churches return to Russia after this conflict in the Ukraine? Um, I think that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is still its own Ukrainian Orthodox Church, right? It's not under any Greek jurisdiction that I'm aware of. I've never heard that.
Yes, I mean this is a very involved question. I'm honestly saying that because there's different churches in Ukraine. There was a
Right.
church that used to be part of Moscow Patriarchate that has never been considered by Moscow Patriarchate to be sort of in direct opposition to canons, as they have proclaimed their own independence. And there are churches that were deemed heretical, that were received into by Constantinople Patriarchate and legitimized by their decision in their own understanding of that legitimacy. And that we're getting into the canonical and very, very complicated issues that brought up some of the conflicts, and may have been the, in some ways, the beginning of the spiritual tragedies that have occurred. And we can't, answer the question about who is going to come back where and who left, really, or who just remained. But there, in our opinion, there, Ukrainian people, in their majority of the faithful Orthodox people, are in a true sense, remain to be Orthodox, and these historic events hopefully will never shake their faith. And this is beyond jurisdiction at this stage, I think. The religious situation shouldn't be politicized, as our late blessed memory Metropolitan Hilarion, who was our first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, who passed away this year, who is regarded by many, many people across the world, not just in the ROKOR, to be a voice of love and true spirit of Christ, has uh, prayed for the holy Ukrainian land, prayed for all people, and urged us to abstain from politicizing faith, but trying to become and remain Christ-centric in our faith. So when we talk about the complexities of jurisdictions and things like that, it's a whole science and a whole very complicated historical and canonical situation. And I wouldn't be the one to speak on a situation as an expert, and also as a prophet that will tell you who and where people are going to be joining on a mass level of countries. And I
Yeah.
just pray that there will be no more killing, and there will be no more religious conflict within Orthodoxy, and that's what we pray for. Is what we're trying to do.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Father Vladimir, and thank you guys. If you would hit like and share, and tell me below what you think about Tarkovsky's films. Tell me what you think about the documentary, and look forward to interview number 1 with Andrey Jr. coming in the next